think the beauty of this format tonight is we're a wee bit more relaxed than we've been, and it's a panel session rather than presentation. So we probably can just make a wee start when people are coming in, and anybody who's late in can catch up. So, welcome everybody to this Sustainable Beef Systems webinar. This is the fourth in our FAS Farm Advisory Service Sustainable Beef Systems webinar series. This is the final one. The plan here is really to give attendees the chance to fill the blanks a wee bit, to ask a few questions, to challenge a few speakers, hopefully very nicely and friendly. So rather than doing this one on our webinar platform, it's done on Zoom here, so we can actually open up to or allow questions to come through with the participants asking the question rather than me botching an attempt to pull the question together. So I think quite exciting. We've got most of our panelists back. So through the series, and I would encourage anybody we're looking at who's booked on and who's been on lots of the previous or all of the previous webinars, and there's a really good return rate. So that's good for us. However, for those of you that haven't maybe seen some of the previous webinars, they're all available on the FAS website. The recordings are there. So we won't dwell on maybe too much on what was actually said on them because we've only got a 1 hour slot, but just quick run through really. So at the start, we were looking at the problem, so where we're at in terms of policy and sustainability. So we had Stevie Thompson and Jude Capper. So it's good to have both of you back today, and it'll be good. We probably tied your hands a wee bit when it came to, we were focusing entirely on where policy and sustainability story is at. It'll be good to bring it to life in terms of your views on what it means at a farm level as well. After that, we had Sasha Grierson, SEC Consulting, but Sasha's actually skiing, which is a very legitimate excuse to not be here. But Sasha did put a lot of good points across, which I think a lot of us have captured. And on the same day, we also had Stephen Sanderson, who brought a lot of his Nuffield experience and the KPI thing to life as well. So it's great to have Stephen back. And then before Christmas, we had Neil McGowan, who basically focused on everything when it came to his or how he's got to where they're at Inchuk, so what they've achieved and how they got there. The importance of, I think my take home there was you want a happy cow, because a happy cow is a healthy cow is a fertile cow, and a fertile cow is a profitable cow. So that's summarised the issue with beef, I think, really pretty well, or the targets for beef. And at the same time, we had Rosie, who unfortunately she's off sick just now, so we don't have Rosie back with the veterinary aspect. So I hope you'll agree we've got a pretty esteemed panel. This, I say it every time, but I mean it this time, this is your webinar, so this is your meeting, so we really could do with questions to come forward. So we'd encourage you to use the Q&A function or the chat, and with Laura and Hazel in the background just to monitor that and steer me in the right direction. But it could be quite a short evening if we don't get many questions from the floor. What I'm hoping is we are not sitting in a village hall or sitting in a conference suite somewhere. We're all sitting in our own houses, but it would be good to get it as close to what we would expect at a normal panel evening. So let's have a few questions from the floor, a few from each other, and a bit of fun as well. So that's the plan. I probably have missed out on something I was supposed to say, but I think at that we'll probably just make a wee start. What I should say, I did miss something. When you're asking a question, if you can put your hand up to start with, if you're happy to actually ask the question yourself, that would be really useful. And that way you're more part of it as well. And also, unlike other webinars, you've got the chance to maybe come back at a speaker with a different point as well. So anyway, enough from me. What I'd like to start with is to go to Stevie and Jude, who we heard a lot of really good insight in terms of current government thinking, policy direction, sustainability, where we're going. But what I wondered from the two of you is the kind of so what question is, so we know roughly the direction policy is going in. We don't necessarily like the direction some of that policy is going in, but what should farmers do? You know, what should we focus on, and what, in your view, what changes do you expect to see in beef herds over the next, say, 10, 15 years? alongside or in spite of these policy changes. Stevie, do you want to go first?
I just asked them $64 million questions. What does the beef herd look like in 10 years' time or 15 years' time? So there's a panel. The government have set up another stakeholder panel looking at livestock genetics, and part of the discussion has been about what should the herd look like and what should performance. It's interesting. I haven't heard the other panelists talks, and particularly on KPIs. In what are the key performance indicators that they need to be trying to encourage the industry to get to, so that they can meet their climate change objectives. And if you think about it, we could say, well, policy could drive that, or the private sector could drive that. And I think the private sector may drive changes depending on how Donald Trump and his tearing up of the Paris Accord and the climate change objectives from an American perspective, how that all plays out. So I think animals will get naturally slightly smaller. I think the performance will improve in terms of all of the metrics that you might look at in terms of slaughter ages. In terms of first calving ages, we're seeing them declining already. The data is showing me that between 2015 and 2023, we've lost 20,000. There was 46,000 cows that were previously calved that were empty for 2 years. At the end of December, they had been empty for 2 whole years. That's dropped to 23,000. So that, people are improving as the cull cow trade's picked up. That's all improving as we move forward. I think there will be an increased focus on identification of animals that have got maybe not low methane, but certainly more feed efficient animals. More feed efficient animals are naturally aligned to more to A, profitability, and B, lower emissions. And I think there'll be ways of identifying them from either from slaughter data or from whatever methods that we may see. So I think you'll naturally see that consolidation. The unfortunate thing is that I still fear for the small herds, which are doing biodiversity benefits in Western Isles, on uplands, whatever. And that's where policy, and we're trying to have that discussion with policy just now, is do you have to give these small herds derogations to make sure that they continue to exist and have wider socioeconomic benefits? Or do you do some front loading with regards to policy levers? So do you put 50% uplift on the first 10 animals or the first 3 animals? I don't know, but these are the kind of discussions I think that we're going to have. Else we'll just see people continue to get rid of cows because they're non-profitable. In the long term, remember, there's beef shortages just now globally, which means that the long-term future for beef looks rosy in terms of that price point. But there's a double-edged sword, as always, is that the consumers then have to pay more. And will consumers continue to pay more for beef with other proteins, particularly pig meat and or pork and chicken, being relatively much cheaper? And will we see a shift to that? So there's a whole series of things that are in the mix.
Mm-hmm. But the future has a cow in it.
I think the future is rosy. If you and again, in terms of policy, nobody that is meeting KPIs should be scared of the policy, because everything I'm hearing on policy terms, in terms of anything that might come in conditionality, even if they put more money onto voluntary coupled support payments, if you're calving down your heifers at 2 or 26 months, I don't think you're worrying. If you're having your animals, if you're a finisher and you're putting your animals off before 20 months, I don't think you're going to be worrying. It's how they go with slaughter age. Slaughter age is where you get benefits in terms of emissions, and the government is really focused, or Scottish government are really focused on emissions just now. So they will be looking to potentially drive the slaughter age down. Yeah. That's where the big benefits come from, and getting rid of empty cows.
And it's probably where, so the empty cow story, in my view, is a no-brainer. The slaughter age story, there are rabbit holes along that road. There's issues with politics there too. So, Jude, what's your view on where we're going, or anything to add to what Stevie said there?
This is always the danger with panels, because I find myself just vehemently agreeing with everything that everybody else says and then go, well, I've got nothing else to say because that was absolutely right. So yeah, I completely agree. I I'm slightly less optimistic about change, and that's only because I've done quite a lot of work looking at sort of what we've done in the past and what we're doing now. And we are improving, but it is slow compared to other sectors, for example. But yeah, I think we will be doing better. We will have higher performance. I think it's really key that where farmers are meeting or exceeding KPIs and getting lower carbon footprints, better pasture management, more carbon sequestration, all of the positives, that's documented, that we can prove that, because an awful lot of people saying, oh, I'm doing better than my dad, better than my granddad. We've got to be able to prove that to the policymaker. And when I say policymaker, I include the retailers and the processors as well, because it's really easy for a processor, for example, tomorrow to say, we're only taking cattle from people that do A, B, C, D. Doesn't have to go to consultation, doesn't have to have, focus groups and subcommittees and everything else. It can happen tomorrow. So I think policy will be driven by government, but to some degree it can happen faster and possibly more efficiently, if I dare say that, through retailers and processors rather than just government. And I think that is going to be particularly important for those smaller farmers. We've got to be able to document those biodiversity benefits, those social benefits, those rural community benefits, where at the moment there is some information, but there's not a massive amount of information. And I think that's really, really going to be key. And I think overall, it is looking fairly rosy. Normally at this time of year, I'm showing numbers relating to Veganuary, and I've seen almost nothing. I mean, I did have my daughter coming in. She'll be 11 on Sunday, and she had a massive rant at me because her children's magazine had done a recipe for a lentil curry and then used that to promote Veganuary, and she got very cross about that. Possibly on my behalf, I should think, but we just aren't seeing all of that noise. And I didn't see it last year either. Now, it could be because I blocked everybody on Twitter. I mean, that's perfectly possible. But I don't think we're seeing all the vegan hype quite so much that we've had in the past. And I think people are coming back or staying with the benefits of meat and dairy in their diet, which I think is really good.
Yeah. Probably the market deals with the issues, the issues that are present. So if the market accepts that climate change is an issue, that's the road we drive down. And if the vegan discussion, I get into trouble for calling it an argument, but the vegan discussion is perhaps an option, but it's clearly an option that the vast majority of consumers aren't particularly interested in. And that's from our sake, that's a real positive. That's something that I think we can be. We've probably put. There's been a lot of noise coming at us, but there's been good stories going the other way. And I think we need, as an industry, we need to celebrate the good stuff,
Yeah.
and make plenty of the good things that we do. But no, brilliant. There's a question actually come in there that is a version of what I was going to ask to Stephen first, and then to Neil. Is what if you were looking at EBVs or looking at particular traits and metrics, what's the key things that profitable suckler cows need to dive right into? So where's the really important metrics that we need to be following? Stephen, do you want to have a crack at that one?
Thank you very much, Robert. Thank you again for the invite. Apologies for the background. If it looks like I'm in a cupboard, it's because I am. The answer, I don't know if this is the place to admit it, but I don't really never have, and don't pay very much attention to EBVs. So the traits that I'm looking at, it's difficult to almost get them down to three, because my whole Nuffield was based in around weaning percentage. I think that's it's all good and well having a good scanning, but it's the calf or lamb that's weaned that ends up paying the bills. For me, I think it's really important to have a cows that can produce a calf off grass and give a good daily live weight gain. And then for me, I think the third thing, which is maybe not really connected to the cow, but it's connected to the whole business, is doing it all as cheap as possible. And for me, that means no creep feed, no feeder wagons, as little machinery as possible at the place. and selling the calves direct off their mothers, which is, we are an upland farm. I'll let somebody else who has better land and better fodder do the next stage. So keeping it simple is my third point.
Yeah, excellent. Hey, Neil, without going into a great debate on EBVs, what's your thoughts on key areas to focus on?
I think you need to look at what you've got and what you need to change. I think the breeding values are there as a measure of change from what the breed average is, and if you've got average cows and you're quite happy with your average cows of that breed, you're looking for something that's fairly well up the middle of the graph. It's the measure of how you're going to change it from one to the other. So if you think your cows aren't milking enough, get one with a higher milk figure. If you think your cows are a bit too big, look for a bull that's got a lower mature weight, or sometimes that's not very accurate. So a lower 600-day weight, but decent 200-day weights. Don't go daft on milk. I think the most important thing, maybe if you're looking for a good cow, is to when you're looking at the catalogue at the sale, you can click on the QR code thing. It'll take you right to the bull, and if you click on its mother and its granny and see, you can look at what calves they've had. If she's had 3 calves and over 6 years and no more since the one that you're looking at, she's maybe not the mother of the bull you want to breeding your heifers from. I think that would be the main one. You can follow through. You find find a bull out of a cow that's had a few calves and its granny's been in the herd for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll come back onto that stuff, I'm sure, down the line as well. So I would just happily, there's a few questions that are going to come from the floor, which is good. So the first question is from Serena Sites. So we can bring Serena forward. You're well, Serena. Good to see you. Or hear from you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Okay. So I attended this series because I want to know what the cow of the future looks like. But some people have said that we don't need suckler cows anymore and all our beef will come from the dairy herd. What's the opinion? Also, as someone who keeps rare breeds, which are very fertile, feed efficient and smaller, some of ours have had 10 or 11 calves. What could the future be for them? I also want to ask about, I'm sorry to ask 3 questions. We're Pasture for Life certified with a drive towards lower slaughter age. Where does that leave us?
Yes, so good questions. And that's kind of what I was meaning with the rabbit hole story. So can we go to the dairy one first? Okay. So Stevie, in terms of numbers and what does the dairy industry look like now? And there's obviously a lot of dairy beef coming forward, but do we know where we're at in terms of the capacity of the dairy industry? Are we at peak beef from the dairy, or is there scope to go yet?
You keep asking me $64 million questions.
Yes, that's why you're here.
And this is off the top of my head, so it might not be 100% right. But the last time I looked at, so with the CTS data from Scotland, so I'm able to actually look at animals that are born on dairy herds that are of, and it's hard in the system to know if it is purely a dairy beef animal or if it's come from a suckler cow that happens to be on a dairy holding, without getting into huge complex data sets. But the number of animals that have been born on a dairy farm between 2015 and 2023 that are ending up going into the sort of slaughter age, the prime slaughter age animals, I've seen 45,000 extra of them coming in. Now, where they're slaughtered, I haven't looked at where they're slaughtered. Some of them might be going from Dumfries straight down in England for growing and slaughter there. The usefulness of that data set is that you're seeing that happening. And that's the advent of sex semen and then using beef genetics and very good beef genetics to grow animals out of the dairy herd. Whether or not that is at peak capacity for Scotland, I don't know. Remembering that not so long ago we were in a milk crisis, and world milk prices were on the floor. People in some contracts were getting 9p a litre. Jumped up to some people getting over 50p a litre and comes back. It's in a huge flux, that industry, and that swinging is probably keeping some people out of it. So it's in alignment with world prices as much as anything. And I think probably you're not going to see huge increase in that herd in Scotland in terms of further growth, significant growth in that output. With regards to native breeds, I still think that they've got a massive role to play, particularly once you start stacking up what the public or government are saying that the public want in terms of all these public goods, biodiversity. They're great for biodiversity provisioning. As Stephen says, low input systems are most profitable. There are systems and locations where native breeds ought to work. And where I come from in Central Highlands, they all would have been running native breeds at one time, and have gradually moved. Some farms have moved away from the native breeds towards more continental styles. Yet the ones that are on the hills are the ones that are most profitable. So, yeah, I get that. And sorry, your final question on pasture for life. It's a question I constantly get asked: is do I finish early and reduce emissions based on cereal finishing, or do we continue feeding grass and have a much more natural system? And I've yet to get a full answer on that one myself, and I do ask a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's based on false numbers.
Jude, can I come to you just now on that
Yeah,
one,
yeah.
particularly on the dairy? Serena, could I ask you just to pop yourself on mute? No dramas, but if you could, that'd be good. Jude, dairy beef, where are you at with it? Same question to you as I gave to Stevie, I suppose. Where are we at in terms of, is there much more in the system, do you think?
Yeah, good question. There's a little bit more in the system as it stands. We can always do better in terms of improving calf mortality, heifer growth, et cetera, et cetera. So we do have, and I can't accurately put numbers on it, but I'd estimate we could increase supply by 10, 12, 15%, something like that, simply by doing everything better. I can't specifically talk to this from a Scottish point of view, but I did do some work on a UK point of view for UK government, actually, who were looking at dairy beef. And, if we put it really simply, if half of our beef at the moment comes from dairy on a UK basis, if we want the same supply of beef, we need double the dairy. Which is going to obviously cause, significant issues in terms of milk price, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of processing, in terms of, all of those knock-on effects. And according to the analysis that we did, actually does very little for the total carbon footprint. I'm talking about this from memory because I'd have to look up all the numbers, but it was less than a 5% change in the total carbon footprint. So it didn't have some amazing impact which overwhelmed the industry instantly. And honestly, I don't think we've got room for double the dairy cows simply to double our dairy beef to supply all of our beef from dairy. I think there really is a really important role of suckler cattle out there.
And the thing that hasn't changed, so the dairy industry, the revolution in the last 20 years in the dairy industry is quite incredible in terms of yield and ability to produce a cow that can live and a cow that can produce a decent enough beef calf.
Yeah.
She still has 4 stomachs and 1 uterus.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
the key point. Nothing has changed in terms of the dairy cow. The one thing that has changed is their numbers have slipped a bit. Their yields are higher. And I do wonder, and this is just a wonder, in the dairy, if you're a dairy cow that lives you've got 4 lactations, you've got 3 dry periods over 4 lactations. Your dry period is a period of inefficiency in that cycle. Now we've got genomics. Now we know we can now look for cows that have got really long peaks, that peak high and stay milking for a long time. So perhaps the dairy cow of the future, and I'm conscious this is the beef cow of the future we're talking about, but the risk for the beef industry is that the dairy cow of the future actually only has 1 calf or 2 calves in its life. and the beef that is a byproduct and a really exciting thing at the moment actually becomes a sideline and becomes something that's a non-issue, because dairy farmers are focused on producing milk. That's their primary function. So I personally feel that the beef industry needs to be cautious. We need to embrace it. We need to, and for those of us that can make use of beef out the dairy herd animals as a grazing tool or as a profit-making tool, grab it with both hands and go for it. But the suckler cow has to have a role in our food security is the wrong word, but beef security has to have a place to play there, or a part to play. Neil, you are currently in Telford, you're down. Do you want to explain where you're at? And maybe I'd quite like to just dip into what the mood of where you're at is today.
Yeah, I would like to apologise for my background as well, because if it looks like I'm at a plush hotel room, I'm in Telford at the Cattle Breeders Conference. So we've had it's sort of been the beef day, but there's been quite a lot of dairy stuff at it. We've had a couple of speakers from HDB being very upbeat about global demand as well as national demand, and reducing supply, and a bit of concern just about maybe how sustainable the pricing system is. But that's more or less, we've heard that too. On the dairy bit, we had Marco Winters, the head of the sort of dairy genetics in the UK, speaking about just the success story of what sex semen has been in the dairy industry. And he quoted 84% of dairy inseminations as sex semen, and 52% of all dairy inseminations with, or 52% of all inseminations with beef sires. So looking from that, there's probably not a lot, and he said we're way ahead of everybody else in the world in terms of our use of sex semen and then the use of beef to replace that. So that that's not got much further to go than where it's at the moment, if you get what I mean. I think. Yes, back to the question. The mood down here is quite good, I would say. Yep. But the kind of key message was that trusted farmers, we're trusted, us farmers, and if we're caring for the welfare of our livestock and the health of our countryside, the land that we've got needs the cow, and the environment that we've got needs a cow. And if we can produce some healthy, nutrient-dense food out of that, we're in the suckler cow's got a strong position, and probably bringing that back to the question, they're just the suckler cow's got a definite place to be. That question was asked today as well, and the answer was there's just too much rough ground and rougher country that the cow needs to be on. Dairy cows won't hack that. Finishing cattle not on that, and that's where the rare breeds sit as well.
Yeah. Stephen, pasture for life. So it's obviously your system is pasture based, so or pasture focused. What about, are you concerned? So obviously you're not pasture for life, and it is a bit different. But are you concerned about slaughter ages? And it's worth pointing out, slaughter age story is only an idea at this stage. It's not a snowball that is rolling down the hill directly for you going to happen right now. So we don't need to panic about it. We do need to know roughly what's happening. What do you think about the role of grass-fed going forward, grass-finished? What's your thoughts?
I'll be honest, it's not a subject I know an awful lot about. As you say, I'm grass-based myself, because I am very much just a calf producer. So I sort of pass that on. Since my Nuffield, I was very fortunate to visit a couple of pasture for life farms down in, well, south of the border, down in Herefordshire, actually. Really, really interesting, selling the beef in box, and most of their customers were ex-vegetarians, and people for health reasons thought that they couldn't eat meat, but it turns out it was actually grain-fed beef. They couldn't eat. It wasn't actually red meat. So, as I say, me knowledge on it, slaughter ages, yeah, I don't know. I just think it's really interesting that when beef supply is plenty, we get sort of these things, restrictions get mentioned. Just this week, I heard a livestock agent saying to a guy who has stuck with it, and he's kept on producing the 400 and something kilo carcass. He's kept with it. He likes his big continentals. And I heard the livestock agent saying to him on Monday night that he says we've gotten this week, the weight limit's been lifted from 420 to 430, and it probably will get completely done away with. And that's the type of thing I think when the price is down, we look for, whether it's grass-fed, we look to make our products stand out. But the reality is, when the price is booming as it is just now, it's just beef that's needed and wanted at that time.
It is interesting, and I was at store sale last week, and we are in an amazing place. You know, the game has fairly changed from thinking back to COVID. The point of COVID, beef went to £3 a kilo. They didn't quite know what was going to happen. So in the first few days of COVID, beef bombed, and then the market sorted itself out. And actually, we went through a really pretty buoyant period. We were at the at that time magic £4 a kilo and cruising along. We're now at 6. You know, or very close to, and stores booming, lack of people producing them, lack of numbers. It's interesting viewing to see how we actually turn this roundabout to normal again. You know, that there's quite a lot can happen. Jude, have you any thoughts on what might happen, or hope? You know, obviously we hope that we can have a sustainable long-term price, but we are used to ups and downs. Any ideas?
I mean, I'm not an economist, and it's always really dangerous when I start a sentence saying that, because I then proceed to say things which have all the economists, you know, wincing and looking away, saying who gave her the mic. But yeah, I mean, we have been used to ups and downs, and honestly, I mean, it sounds like a cop out, but I think that's going to continue to happen, given how long our production cycle is. You know, anything we do today sometimes doesn't have any impacts for a couple of years. So I think it's going to continue to be up and down. I'm in agreement with Stevie's comments earlier that I do feel, you know, optimistic about beef going forwards, optimistic about it still having a place in people's diets and in the sustainability of our industry compared to the global industry in some instances. But yeah, I'm probably best not to try and make too many predictions on actual price.
It's also, I'm not going to ask Stevie that one because it is an impossible question. We don't know what's round the corner. I think we do need to acknowledge, it's right to acknowledge tonight that we are in a probably stronger position than we expected to be. Nobody would believe 12 months ago that we would be in this position. But I suppose looking forward into the next 12 months is a challenge. But I think there's lots of positive stories out there. There's lots of reasons to be positive. And certainly for me, it's great to see the guys who stuck with their suckler herds and rolled the dice again. You know, a couple of years ago when fertilizer was through the roof, we all did have to have the difficult conversation around the kitchen table and see where we were at. And thank goodness, you know, we are in a point where there could be a positive return. You know, there could be something positive to shout about, but controlling costs, as somebody mentioned, is a huge key point. There's somebody I'd like to introduce who is the brains of this whole operation. So Hazel has emailed you all and has run the Sustainable Beef Systems webinar series. She's been great. She's allowed me to chair it, which has been lovely. But Hazel actually has a few more questions from the floor. There's quite a few who've come together. So if I could just get Hazel to unmute and maybe even put her camera on if you want to do that, Hazel.
I wasn't planning on doing that this evening.
Yep.
Questions from people that are unable to actually speak. So first one from you, and just to save you looking back through the chat, Robert. And this is probably one for Neil and Stephen. So is it more important to breed for longevity? Is that a good trait to be looking for? So a cow that's going to reach 12, 13, 14 years old, or are we better to keep the herd younger and more productive and have, you know, younger females that are maybe growing calves quicker? I think we did have somebody say in one of the other webinars that there was some data suggesting older cows, their calves weren't hitting the growth rates that the younger ones were. So, yeah, Neil.
Yeah, I think that was really changed that over the last since you know, just with the physical cows, isn't it? And I would agree the older cows starting to tail off. It's a really good idea to keep the herd a bit younger. There was a geneticist I listened to for a while. That was you know, he spoke about I think it was a stayability was the name of the trait, which was the ability of the cow to be there at her fourth or fifth calf. And you know, so I think that's the really important trait. Actually, if we're looking at the trait, it's this stayability. It's the ability of the cow to be there at four or five cows in, and then you can make that decision rather than her forcing that decision on you before that. So that I suppose that's my answer. Yeah, I would keep the cows young, but keep the cows with the potential to get to that age.
I think on that one, you've got to have the trust in your system that you've actually made genetic progress in subsequent generations. So the theory should be, if you've got a 10-year-old cow, she's probably 10 years by her, well, she can't be 10 years by her best, but you know, she genetically should be heading out the herd anyway. I think it's horses for courses, isn't it?
What we do is the cows, we're starting to turn over cows a bit quicker. But if we've got a cow that's going to, if we've got a really good cow that we really want to keep a female from, she stays because her next heifer calf's pretty valuable to us, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But we've kept cows 1 year too long whiles, and that's we can lose money on that job.
Yeah, and sometimes the end result on that one's pretty sad.
Yeah.
Stephen, have you thoughts on that? You on the same kind of page?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think we would all like our cows to live as long as possible, but good luck in finding out how to do it. I had one of the first cows I ever had. She lasted till she was 16. She went off just because her breeding was then getting worse, and her daughter went off at 7 years old with all the signs of old age. But because ever since I started farming, I've worked a 9 to 10 week breeding period. So about a third of me cull cows every year come because they haven't gone in calves. So that's taken out cows of all ages. And then the other way that me cows really get, because my cows are all in cubicles here in Orkney, we put them on an individual pen when the calf, just for 24 hours, provided there's nothing wrong. And then they go in a bedded court for hopefully the minimum of 5 days, but anything up to a week. But if a cow has to stay on that bedded court any longer, it's usually because of feet, legs, or because the calves no managing to get, because once they go up in the concrete, they get diarrhea. And so any cow that has to stay there longer is put on the cull list. And don't always manage it, because if you need to keep numbers, but that's sort of me way of getting rid of cows. But yeah, I have everything for first calf heavers right up to cows in their teens. Yeah.
What about the cow, to both of you, what about the cow that is she should be good? You know, her mother was good, her granny was good, but she's had 2 wee rats of calves, or she's not done the job. Do we roll the dice and go again? Or is she automatically on the cull list?
She goes.
She goes.
Yeah.
Also,
Yeah.
yeah. And to be fair, she's a lot easier to send off when she's 1,800 quid or more than when she was 500 or 600 quid. It's a different question, but I think we there is that faith and hope that all of a sudden she might pop out a belter, but the reality is she's had the chance, isn't it?
And just to end on that, we've got a comment on the Q&A from Bruce, who is our head stocksman at Easter Howgate, where this project all started. So he has said, don't be afraid to cull a heifer after she's had her first calf, rather than saying, oh, we'll give her another year to try, she might rear good calves. Studies have shown this usually doesn't happen, and they are too valuable to kill young, and it gets their genetics out of the herd quickly. So excellent statement from Bruce there, and I don't think anybody in the panel would disagree there, would we?
And it does.
13% in 2022. 13% of the heifers were dead by the next year.
Mhm.
So they'd calved down, calf registered, and 13% either died on farm or were slaughtered. So it's more than I ever expected.
But the interesting one there is, as an industry, is that too many or not enough? Because really, if certainly in the system where you're keeping your own replacement, I would expect a few to fall out the system, and almost encourage a few to fall out the system in order to keep enough pressure in the system. But it's good to see Bruce on tonight, and also, I mean, what he said there really echoes what was said at the first event we had for this series was actually on farm at Easter Howgate, so that was nice to hear. Nice to be at Easter Howgate. It was good, and good to hear we're still on the same page. Neil, you got a comment?
We were just chatting about that down here today about breeding the yearling heifer, and for a short period. And if you're giving the yearling heifer a bit longer to get in calf, you're losing her. If she's a less fertile yearling heifer and she's getting in calf in maybe the third cycle, she's unlikely to get in calf the next time. So her value's got to drop. Like her peak value would be by being not in calf the first year, when you could get her away as a prime beast, rather than being a calved heifer that calved late, then didn't get in calf the next year, and you're selling at a lowest point in value. So it was just an argument for shortening the bulling period for your yearling heifer if you're calving it
on
too.
the heifers. Yeah. We've got a question from Shona, which is focusing on creek feeding. So we've got Shona on. So Stevie, this one's probably for you. So over to you, Shona.
The feed conversion rates are much better for younger animals than they are for older animals. So is it not more profitable and more beneficial to creep feed the calves? Because once you get over 6 months, the feed conversion starts to drop off quite rapidly. And you can put on a lot of kilos with a very little amount of creep feed up to that age. That's the question.
So, well, we'll go Stephen Sanderson first for that one, I think.
Don't ask the economist.
No.
I was a monitor farm back here in 2012 to 2015. I was told by the facilitator at the start of the project, Stephen, because you're selling your calves young, you're going to have to do creep feeding to keep the congregation happy. So we did it. I'm not going to go into bore you all that now, but the results, I had tried it before and been very disappointed with the results. And when that came up, we did the trial as fair as we possibly could. So the least controversial thing I can say about creep feeding is it is one way to put weight on a calf. But if you have a cow that's you should be looking for cows that have got plenty of milk, and then the grass management is as it should be, then a cow can easy make a calf grow at well over a kilo a day without feed. And I just think if it was natural, if it's the way it should be done, then cows would have been designed with a feed box rather than another.
It's a very good question, Shona, and a good answer. I suppose it depends on the system. There are good examples of creek feed being used really, really effectively, and then there's also examples of nature working really well. Neil, where are you at with a creek feeding? I suppose any stock, but what's your view on inputs?
I'm just trying to analyze my why I'm doing what I'm doing, because it doesn't make sense. We don't creep feed because I'm trying to gather data on how well the cow is milking, I suppose. And but at the same time, I do look after the calf in its first winter, and then we put a lot of them out again to a lot of them go out again. Yeah, so I'm the same principle. We're feeding these calves a wee bit younger, and we're not getting the compensatory growth when they go out for their second summer. Yeah, so I don't know. Yeah,
I think for me, just thinking about it just now is if we've got. I mean, Stephen, it's worth maybe you saying what or reminding us what your growth rates and weaning weights have been, what you're managing to achieve without Leap.
Yeah, so I'll be hitting. Oh, Chinks, I should have had that here in front of me. That your numbers, but we be hitting 1.2, 1.25 daily life weight gain. No, I'm not weighing the calves physically at birth, so I can't. But I count a weight of 40 to 50 kilos at birth, just to make sure that I'm not cheating anybody. Because I do have some good big lumps of calves when they're born. The cementals are good big calves, so they'll weigh. But I also I'm calving me heifers to the Solaire, and they are small calves, so they'll be. So I don't think I'm cheating anybody by saying 40 to 50, but that's the only thing I can't say. But yeah, and yeah, it's getting that. Folk have said to me, "Oh, it works for you, Stephen, because you've got milky cows." Right, okay. So do you, when you go to the bull sale, do you go round the pen saying, right, I want the bull that's going to breed me the driest heifers and the driest cows, because I want to create feed? Aren't we all trying to get cows with milk? That's just what they do. I spent 3 years as a dairyman, and I think it's a really useful exercise for a beef farmer to go and work in a dairy farm. You put cows on a field of stale grass, and they're there for a couple of days. You put them on a fresh field of grass, or even better, a fresh field of aftermath, and you see the milk coming in that pipe just within 12 hours. Now, I think we completely underestimate how much milk our calves drink. And if it isn't, if it's not there for them to drink, they certainly can't have it. But if you can produce it, and the silage aftermath is a huge part of my system. And I also break me cows up and down into small bunches for the back end. For I find that if you leave, once the weather breaks, and if you've got a bunch of 30, 40 cows in a field, and they start moving about and trampling, and they get discontented, and the grass gets dirty, I think that knocks kilos off your calves. So it's just lots of different things I think you can do that can easily replace a creep feeder.
Where the danger of me pretending I'm an economist when there's an economist on here, or a couple of economists, but we've got a lot of diminishing returns. So if we've got a herd of cows, as you say, Stephen, that is they're milking like there's no tomorrow. The calves taking as much milk as they can. There can't be as much additional gain from that creep as there is with a herd that's a bit stale. So for me, I think I'm going to go back on the fence, but I think the creeps are a useful tool where required, but it shouldn't necessarily be the default setting or the long-term plan. If we're chasing efficiencies and gains, it's a tool. It doesn't necessarily need to be all in all. Hazel, have we got Tom French? Is he available to come on? She said, thanks, Shona. That's a good question.
Is that
Hi,
me
Tom.
on?
That's you. Yep. By the way,
Sorry, I wasn't putting my hand up for fear of you putting me on my picture on, and then I hadn't got my makeup done like you guys. I hadn't got my makeup done, so no. I just wondered. We're all aware of the economies of scale, and also the increased costs in more remoter and disadvantaged areas, upland areas. So, in the absence of effective policy levers, like what maybe Stephen alluded to earlier on, are we destined to see a continued decline in beef herds in these more remote and upland and smaller herds? Are we destined to see a reduction in them, perhaps at the expense of them shifting east, perhaps, to where there's more resources in terms of straw? But again, as I say, that will surely have an effect on the carbon sequestration on the areas where the cows are going to go off. So that's going to have an effect on on the sequestration of the areas that's, and then you're just going to be left with ideal wildfire material.
There's a lot in that, Tom. Good question. If we focus on the main body of that question, Stevie, are we thinking, or Jude? I suppose I think Jude, I'd quite like to go to you about what's happening down south as well in terms of policy. But Stevie, what are you thinking in terms of what the future looks like for remote and rural areas, upland cows? Do you think we're on a journey that they're going to continue to be less? Is that die already cast?
Well, my position on it is quite clear, is that LFA policy needs to reflect the additional costs of production. So we need to move to a model that's based not on something that was done in 1977, which is what we've currently got in terms of LFAS. We need to move to something that better reflects the additional costs, particularly on islands, but also in the mainland, very remote parts where getting feed and fertilizer and all of the things associated with it, if we want to maintain agricultural activity and grazing in these regions. And Tom's point about if you've not got these things, then that means families aren't working the land. We've seen land abandonment in some areas. We've seen wildfires. Wildfires are going to get worse. The sequestration or the carbon storage position in that scenario isn't good. And the bit that quite often is missed in the arguments on all of this, Tom, is biodiversity. So, you know, if you go to the Machair and the Western Isles or Uist or Harris, whatever it is, everybody recognises the really critical part that grazing cattle in these environments play for that unique habitat. And that is a strong lever. And I put on the webinar chat that actually some of the environmental NGOs are now standing up in policy discussions and say we must support cattle production in these areas. So I think there's an awakening that the role that cattle play in maintaining economies, because you know, as I said somewhere today, is, you know, farmers are very good at when they receive money and spending money as well, and actually cattle have got very high economic multipliers. So actually, that maintaining that is important. And you know, the Scottish government have got island commitments, you know, that are probably paying a bit of lip service to at this moment in time, but they're trying to tighten down on it. And then the rural delivery plan and then the rural support plan are all meant to try and focus attention on where support is most needed. And I think if you go all the way back to Brian Park's report in 2010, he advocated that the people that you need to support the most are the people in the most peripheral areas and most challenging farming environments, not the people with the best quality land and the most resources to hand, nearest to the feed manufacturers, etc. So I think politically that message is starting to be heard. Can we persuade policy people on this? Well, that's the journey that we're on. And in my mind, the whole system works on, you know, similar to the SSBSS. There's an uplift for island producers, and that's where LFAS needs to go. It needs to be a percentage uplift based on your peripherality or your additional costs. And that's what some of us are pushing for.
Yeah. Jude, on that one, if we can progress that one into what's happening south of the border changes, you know, there are significant political differences between our future policy and the English, in fact, all future policies. What's your thoughts on England, and what are you concerned about what's happening in England?
Yeah, really good question. And I mean, I was nodding when Steve was talking, so I was like, yes, 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 agree again, I have to admit. I mean, obviously we've got a very different situation here from a social point of view, and you know, we see this all over the world. I think if you ask the average person, do you want, you know, small farms, small herds? Oh yes, I want all of that. I don't want to pay for it, you understand, you know, but I want all of that. From a governmental point of view, there is definitely this drive to lower footprints, more efficiency, obviously, and considerable differences in our support payments coming in as well. So, you know, I don't possibly feel like we are possibly under a little bit less of a threat, but equally we don't have those, well, some would argue we do, but we don't have those vitally important areas that we find in the North Highlands, for example. We don't have those really important landscapes. You know, we have Dartmoor, we have Exmoor, but I would argue that some of the landscapes, some of the ecosystems in the North Highlands are absolutely unique, and we don't really have an equivalent of that down here to protect in the same way, I don't feel. If there are any Exmoor or Dartmoor farmers like lurking in the background, I'm probably going to get assassinated pretty quickly. So I think I'm a little bit less despondent about the decline, but if we look globally, there has been a trend over the last, you know, take your pick, 10, 20, 30 years for fewer smaller farmers. And I think that will continue to happen into the future, regardless of where we're placed. And I heartily agree with Stevie's comments about the importance of support payments for those on the periphery. And that means in terms of access to markets, access to infrastructure, you know, all of those things that just make everything a little bit more difficult every single day.
I just come back in there, Robert.
Of course, yeah.
Like I don't like bringing politics into it, but the current Minister for Agriculture keeps on saying in public, "I want more cows." So, you know, it's slightly against the grain for him to be saying that whilst his policy officials are working out ways how to reduce the methane impact from cattle. So, you know, your current Minister for Agriculture is supportive of it. And the other thing that's ongoing just now, because in all of the stuff that I'm doing and in discussions with government, is the people that pay the most in terms of compliance costs per pound they receive are your smallest producers. So filling in your IAX forms, all of the stuff associated with compliance, and they pay the most. And I'm really keen that they either have a light scheme or front loading. So you basically give a higher payment rate on the first X number of animals or X number of hectares. And that's possibly getting a little bit of traction, because you have to, if we don't safeguard these small herds disappear, then that is the big risk, is it becomes too complex. And we know that conditionality and all of what the government are trying to achieve will become complex. And I'm already scared that with the whole farm plan and everything, that you see people drifting out of the sector.
I think one sort of common comment from larger producers is, why do the small producers matter? If you look at and we've obviously touched on the whole local economies and all that, but if you look at the sheer number of small producers that there are, they all of a sudden become a very, very big, cumulatively, there are a lot of cattle out there held in the hands of small producers. So
there might not be a lot of cattle, but there are a lot of people. There's a lot of land management. There's a lot of activity. There's a lot of things that go alongside it. There's a lot of people doing these things on part-time basis and throwing their own money at it for the sheer love of it. And it's a slightly different perspective. And where do you draw the line? Your small producer, where does he become a medium-sized producer that actually is? Because the medium-sized guys are the ones that or people are the ones that are vital for supplying the big finishers. You know, the bulk of our herd is in that sort of 40 to 100 size herds. That when does small become medium? Because the medium-sized producers are the ones that are most vital for the entire supply chain of beef.
And also, when does the 40 to 100 cow herd, in terms of fixed costs, in terms of at what point, they are under a lot of pressure too. So yeah, it's very interesting. The policy story, all I can say is, let's make the right noise in the right direction about the right things. Let's celebrate the good stuff, point out the things that are challenges, and trust that there's at least an appetite out there to have a support scheme going forward. And it's up to us to engage with that where we can. We're maybe getting far enough down the road for that, but certainly having those conversations and making sure we have a system that's as good as it possibly can be. Stephen and Neil, there's a few questions that we can kind of pull together in terms of breed. So does breed matter? When we're looking forward, does breed matter? Is it something? Do you think we're going to see changes in breeds, changes in significant changes in breeds, or a do you think we'll continue to see lots of people working with lots of different breed systems and operations? Thoughts from either of you? Random question, sorry, not particularly well asked. Neil, do you want to go first? You've probably got the most of a vested interest here.
Crossbreds. There's too much of an advantage in a crossbred, and too much advantage in hybrid vigor in the cow not to be using that. So I think the cow of the future is a crossbred cow, and I think she's probably got a bit of native in her, and she's got a bit of continental maybe, depending on where you're at. I think maybe some of the breeds will evolve a bit to look a bit different from what they are at the moment. Will me and my neighbour and his neighbour and the next guy, will we all have different breeds? Yes, we will, because we're like that, I think.
It's almost part of our culture, isn't it? You go to South America and others, you see peas in a pod, and we celebrate a bit of diversity, which is in the rest of our lives, it's a good thing. So let's do that in cattle too. Stephen, any thoughts there?
Yeah, breed does matter. And exactly what Neil says. I mean, Nuffield proved that to me as well, that a crossbred cow is, I would say, is the best of both worlds. I don't think I've ever said this publicly, and I would never say which breeds it is, but there was some breeds, fairly common breeds, that I came to the conclusion, and I visited a lot of herds during my Nuffield. I can see absolutely no reason other than the fact that people just love them. But financially, there was nothing that breed was doing that another breed couldn't do as well, or better, I would say. And on the whole diversity thing, yeah, it's variety is the spice of life. But the one thing I think that, and going back to the dairy thing, that we maybe should take a wee bit more serious. It's great having all this variety, but we don't have consistency, and that is the one thing, the dairy cross beef, because a lot of them are going down the Angus route, and there'll be a consistent shape, there'll be a consistent size, and there'll be a consistent fat cover. Compared with the suckler job, we've got everything for bull beef to every breed and colour under the sun, all ages, all weights, all different fat cover, all different conformation. And although it's fantastic to see around the countryside, it's certainly, at the end of the day, we are producing beef, and consistency is very important in a product.
I think I'm right in saying that one of the big retailers that's really their ambition is to have basically every bit of beef that they are selling in a particular range as a half sibling to the steak next to it. They're all off the same bull. That's the direction they want to get to for consistency. So it's a different approach. But can we bring in Bruce Wiper? So we mentioned Bruce before, but Bruce is keen for a wee leather. So Bruce, do you want to put your camera on as well, Bruce? Are you decent?
It won't work, Robert. The audience cameras won't
sorry.
come on. Yeah.
That's fine. No. Fire away, Bruce.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, hear you fine.
Yep. The question I was going to ask, I was going to go back to when we were talking about what's going to determine if we go for larger herds or medium-sized herds and that. I was just wondering what people's opinions are on if staffing issues in the wider agriculture industry is probably going to play a bigger part than what a lot of people think about and talk on. Like so many people that you speak to nowadays that are reducing their herd size or reducing their flock size because they can't get staff. So they're reducing it down to what's manageable for a one-man band or two men. And it was just, do we think that's going to get worse going forward? Because in reality, when you look at the numbers in this industry, they're declining, and the average age is getting older. So do we think that's going to play a big part going forward in what will be classed as a big herd?
Really good question. Thanks, Bruce. Neil, do you want to go on that one first?
Yeah, I think Bruce has got a right good point there. in the fortunate position that we've got enough folk at home that are quite keen on cows, and working with cows isn't an issue, but yeah, finding the next people is very difficult, I think. And I totally agree with them. I think in the sheep side of our business, we really took that on board, and there's quite a lot of sheep jobs that I don't really like doing, but I really like working with sheep in general. But and we just need to shift the jobs a little bit, and we change the sheep a little bit, and working with sheep can become quite pleasurable. And I think we can we probably need to adapt our cows to do the same. To do the same thing and take out the jobs. If we can take out the jobs that we don't like doing, and I think the things that we'll find harder doing going forward, in many places we'll be getting folk to stay up calf cows all through the night for months on end. That's probably the big one. If we can take that out, it's a lot of the jobs working with cows can be very pleasurable, and we might end up with a different type of people if we could change the workload around what we're doing with our cows. And quiet cows too, focusing on temperament in herds. You speak to too many people that go into shift a mob of cows, they don't look forward to it, where it should be. It should be a nice job.
I remember hearing a terrifying thing about temperament, that it's not only heritable, it's also physiologically transferred into them. So if you get a cow that's stressed in the second trimester, it's automatically programming that calf to be bonkers too. So it's a self-perpetuating problem. So certainly that chasing temperament stories, aye, so powerful. Stephen, thoughts, succession, labour shortages, is that one of the biggest threats for farm businesses?
Yeah, sadly I think it is, but I like to be a fairly optimistic guy. And yesterday we had our first store sale of the season, of the year here in Orkney, and the cattle were up, I think, 300 to 400 quid on the year. And as already mentioned, it's great to see. And I genuinely think if that can be maintained, or rumours has it the beef's going to go up yet. I saw folk in the market yesterday I've never seen there before. And we noticed that after COVID, when COVID really sadly, there was a few, if their health was failing, COVID finished them going to the market. But as the price started to pick up, would have been 2 years ago, it started to bring, and John Angus at Aberdeen Northern said the same, it started to bring folk out again. And yesterday there was just a buzz about the place, like it was a bull sale or a toop sale. And I think already, I certainly here in Orkney, you're hearing rumours that folk are starting to, well, I know a few cases of leaving other industries, whether it's the building industry, salmon farming, to come back to farming, because the guys they're having to pay to get anybody at all, and then you're getting folk that would have stayed in farming before, but they left because the money drove them somewhere else. So I think if the money can I think we could see folk, and just next time you go through an airport, you look at the folk that's going through a security, that are doing the security in the bags. There's not one of that folk look anyways interested in what they're doing. It's a terrible job. And I just think I count myself so lucky to be doing, we have such a variety in farming. For day to day, never mind in the course of a month. So I think there's an awful lot of folk out there that, if provided they were given the proper training and the farmer's patient with them, I think there's a lot of folk would be interested in a career in agriculture, because there's a lot of mind-numbingly boring jobs out there that folk are just doing because they have to.
There's a significant marketing piece for us all to do here, because I think we're all guilty, or as an industry we can be guilty of telling young people how it's a terrible job and it's mundane and it's this and it's that, and then we get to the end of our career and realise that we don't want to retire because we love our job and it's the best thing ever. And that's happened for generation and generation, and I think we are at a stage where we really need to go and sell this. You can work from home. That's something that people love to do. We can be flexible. We can, you can adapt systems. It's never perfect. That's the other thing. You never know.
No.
It's not a production line that there's no challenges and it's totally mundane. You never know what's coming next. I think there's a
Yeah.
tremendous story to tell, but certainly the lack in this part of the world, the lack of young blood, enthusiastic people and people that are keen to work is becoming a pretty significant issue. So it's a good point and certainly something we all need to address. David, Jude, have you any thoughts on that one or anything to add there?
Yeah, it is the labour issue is a major issue cross sector. So you go and speak to hoteliers, they'll tell you the same thing. So they're shutting their hotels on certain days because they can't get staff. And it seems to be that we are in this position in time. There's fewer and fewer young people coming through, remember. We're at a point in a cycle that the number of children coming through is at probably lowest for a long, long period of time. So there will be gaps in the employment system. And if you, where I am, or where I'm from, like the hills behind, there's very few people putting sheep out the high hill now because they can't get anybody neighbouring to actually A, have a hefted flock, and B, get the people to go and gather tens of miles into the mountains. So the mountains are becoming these areas that aren't grazed other than by deer, yet we're still paying agricultural support payments on them. So that discussion is yet to be had, is when is agricultural activity in the hills not agricultural activity anymore? So there's a whole series of questions that that discussion on labour revolves around. And on the beef side of things, I think Stephen's right, is that if it's paying well and farmers pay their staff well, then it is a reward. It'll be a rewarding career for some people. And I think kids nowadays are looking for alternative, not going to university, looking for things that there's going to make them happy. But again, I keep coming back to every 5 years or something, when something goes wrong in the farming industry or there's low prices, suddenly everyone said, don't get into this. This is a hellish industry. You don't want a future in this. And as you say, doing yourself a disservice in the long run. You have to be consistently saying this is a brilliant industry to work in. And it doesn't you don't have to just be a farmer. You can actually work in other aspects of it as well on part-time basis.
You know, also be absolutely certain that that same person on the airport security line isn't in the pub at the weekend talking about their passion for being an airport security. And we need airport security people, we should say, in case anybody is in that industry, we need those people too. So, Jude, any final thoughts on the succession story? Anything to add there?
Yeah, just only one thing, which is that I don't actually have any background in agriculture. I came into agriculture through us getting a horse when I was 9 and then riding around the fields and looking at crops and going, oh, that's interesting. You know, I don't have a parent or even a grandparent with a farm. And I think that's the missing bit as well sometimes, encouraging people outside the industry. Because I talk to so many kids who only see bits of agriculture. I mean, we live in a relatively rural-ish, rural-urban, whatever the word would be, village here. And we have a local sheep farm, and all the kids from the primary school and the preschool go there every year at lambing. So in their, you know, whatever it is in total, 8 or 9 years from, you know, preschool all the way through up. And they love it, you know, they talk about it all the time. They get so excited. Even though, you know, 95% of them have, again, no ag background or basis whatsoever. So I think encouraging that, and to come back to the university point as well, and I'm a bit biased on this because I'm the chair of the route panel for for agriculture, environment and animal care apprenticeships in England. But, you know, I think we have a real opportunity to improve apprenticeships across the UK as a whole and get more excited young people into it based on the science, the technology, you know, the fabulous places to work, let's face it, you know, all the things, earning money while getting an education as well. So I think we have huge opportunities there to entice more people into our industry.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point to finish on. So thank you to you all there. Excellent question and really well answered. So the cow of the future, that was the title for today. We've talked probably at it and round about it. I think the conclusion for me is the cow of the future is down to us as producers. It's down to finding out what we need to do with our herds and our farms and our resources that we have available to us. It's not going to be a blueprint out of a book somewhere that says this is what you need to do to make a profitable suckler cow. So for some people, Stephen, you've got your geographical issues and a need to produce that probably higher end calf to justify haulage and justify, you know, where you are. There's areas where we've got really cheap forage and we can utilize that to winter a cow on very little. So it's a difficult time. I think the key for me is across the whole program, the importance of data, the importance of benchmarking KPIs and knowing what you're looking at and not maybe looking at too much, but taking a dive into the key areas. We spoke about fertility, survival and growth. We spoke about happy, healthy, fertile, profitable cows, whatever way we cut it. But let's dive into the areas that are of the most bits you're poorest at and make the biggest gains there. Hopefully this has been a useful exercise today. I've certainly thoroughly enjoyed speaking to most of our panelists again, or most of our speakers again. I would highlight to those of you who haven't been on the previous webinars, the recordings are there. There's a lot of useful stuff in there. There's a lot more take-home messages. So have a dive into that. This recording will be available again. We were unsure, depending if anybody was going to be very controversial coming on with the question and swearing and shouting or whatever, but we've managed to avoid that. So thank you to all the panelists and people that have asked questions for doing it in a politically correct manner. So that's appreciated. I'm conscious Neil McGowan's got his pudding to get at the big grand bash this evening, so we need to wrap up at that. The main, I think the point that's landed with me the best tonight, so the tail end point about succession and marketing and pushing our industries are a really important one. But the one I want to bring back is the temperament story, is the dealing with safe cows, dealing with cows that are actually nice to work with. And within that somewhere, if you look at your own herd and cut out those maybe 5% of cows that are the problem, you probably can run a hell of a lot more cows on top of that. And that's where the labour efficiency, the labour problem that we spoke about is a significant fixed cost to your business. If we can't source the labour, but we can find a cow that's easier to run, there's profit at the end of it. And that's, I think, something that's certainly for me, that's been a takeaway from today. There's lots to think about. What I would say is, briefly, while we're still on here, the chat function, it would be really good. We're planning an additional or a 25, 26 Sustainable Beef Systems webinar series. It'd be really good to get your thoughts on what we should cover in them. So we've covered quite a lot of broad stuff. Maybe there's things that you want to take a deeper dive into, or maybe you just want to do it all again. Positive feedback's always nice. Negative feedback's really constructive. So if you can, let us know what you're thinking in the chat or by email to Hazel, and we'll see where we go and hopefully look forward to a really successful 25, 26 series as well. Oh, Stephen, have you got something?
Sorry, I was just reading a comment in the chat. I think it's Serena that's maybe said about breeding mongrels. I would just like to clarify that I'm not a big fan of. I am a big fan of the purebreds, and exactly agree with our point that you need the purebreds to breed to get that hybrid vigor. So just in case anybody was thinking that that's what I was advocating for, I'm not a fan of them at all.
Good. So we will finish on a politically correct point of clarification. So that's really good. But I think a point echoed by everybody. So yeah, basically, thank you very much to all our speakers. Very much appreciated. There's been a lot of really good stuff in this, and certainly wish everybody a successful. Most people are heading into calving and lambing and things, and hope that we can have a really successful, positive calving season this year, and also 10, 20 years down the line as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.